In the summer of 1962, Khrushchev's hedgehog triggered the gravest confrontation of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet ships crossed the Atlantic bound for Cuba. They carried military hardware, Soviet troops, and nuclear missiles capable of striking nearly anywhere in the United States. On October 14th, U-2 reconnaissance flights over Cuba confirmed what for months had been rumored.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons to be turned back.
For Americans, the idea of going to war with the Soviet Union was terrifying, but having nuclear missiles stationed permanently in Cuba was unthinkable.
I'd hate like heck to see us go to war, but if it's necessary to prevent a nuclear war, I think the action has to be taken at this time.
Well, I think it's high time we stopped Russia from having things our own way.
I know that some action should be taken, but he's going to have to tread very lightly, short of war.
At the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronted his Soviet counterpart.
All right, sir. Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
I am not in an American courtroom, sir, and therefore I do not wish to answer a question that is put to me in the fashion in which prosecutor does. In due course, sir, you will have your reply.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
The crisis turned critical. U.S. military forces prepared for a possible invasion of Cuba. It was the greatest emergency troop mobilization since World War II. For the first time in its history, the nation's nuclear army, the Strategic Air Command, or SAC, moved to Defense Condition 2. The next step, DEFCON 1, would mean nuclear war. If a nuclear strike was launched from Cuba, American Minuteman missiles were poised to destroy every major city in the Soviet Union.
Re-entry, arming and fusing.
Just as the flexible response had promised, the president had every military option at his disposal.
Warhead, arming and fusing. Channel 7.
As tension mounted, the first opening in the crisis came from Khrushchev. On October 26th, he cabled the president.
Mr. Kennedy, you and I are like two men pulling on a rope with a knot in the middle. The harder we pull, the tighter the knot, until even he who tied it will not have the strength to untie it. Let us relax forces, take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this.
As the two leaders fumbled to untie the knot, events they had unleashed threatened to overwhelm them. Castro pleaded with Khrushchev to launch a preemptive nuclear strike should the U.S. mount an invasion. In Washington, Kennedy was pressed to attack Cuba. Air Force General Curtis LeMay insisted American military forces should surround the island and, if need be, fry it. While the world edged closer to the nuclear abyss, Bobby Kennedy met secretly with the Soviet ambassador in Washington to seek a negotiated settlement. In the end, diplomacy prevailed. On October 28th, a message was broadcast from Moscow. Khrushchev had agreed to remove the missiles. The world breathed a sigh of relief.
The following is the text of President Kennedy's statement of noon. I welcome Chairman Khrushchev's statesmanlike decision to stop building bases in Cuba, dismantling offensive weapons, returning them to the Soviet Union under UN verification. This is an important and constructive contribution to peace.
In exchange for the removal of Cuban missiles, President Kennedy pledged that the U.S. would not invade Cuba. Privately, he also agreed to remove American missiles stationed in Turkey and targeting the Soviet Union. The missile crisis caused the president to reconsider his assumption that a nuclear war was winnable. He now understood that destroying the Soviet Union would mean sacrificing the United States to the same fate. This premise became the basis of a new Kennedy defense strategy: mutual assured destruction. MAD. The idea was that if no one stood a chance of surviving a nuclear war, no one would start one.